Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry for the glitch, I think, that just occurred. I'm Marc Cave, and welcome to the third and final part of our series called Women of the Holocaust. We're ending with a particularly powerful episode about a lady who hasn't actually appeared in public for some 4 years now, who I'm delighted to present, Kitty Hart-Moxon. Good evening, Kitty.
Hello.
And joining us will be her son Peter and daughter-in-law Moira. Now, what I want to get across, I suppose, in the conversation with Kitty this evening is not the entirety of her life story, which is so vast, so rich, we couldn't possibly cover it in an hour. As you'll see, there's plenty of documentaries from which we're going to be showing some clips and a book. I'm going to just give you the outline now of the length and breadth of Kitty's extraordinary experiences during the Holocaust. But the whole point of this, I think, tonight is to focus on her strength as a survivor, as a female survivor in particular, and the female strategies for survival that were very particular to Kitty and her group of people in the camps. And also after the war as a testifier. Kitty was the very first survivor in Britain to start telling her story. She's driven with a real desire to do so for reasons that she will explain. So just to explain how we're going to run this, we're going to be putting a number of questions to Kitty. We're going to be showing some of the clips from her documentaries. And I hope at the end there'll be some time not only to talk to Peter and Moira about how they see continuing Kitty's legacy, but to take some questions from you, the audience, if you have any. But we'll see how we go, because there's a very rich and detailed level of history in this story. So, Kitty.
Hello.
Let's begin. Picking up immediately on this theme of your natural toughness. Quite clearly, you were born pretty hardy and independent-minded. To what extent do you think you owe your survival through Lublin ghetto, through 2 years in Auschwitz, to the death march, and all the other tough things you had to endure over 8 years? How much do you think you owe all of that to just your natural sense of both physical, because I know you were sporty, and mental strength? Tell us a bit about you as a kid growing up in Bielsko.
Okay, well, I was a terrible kid, I can tell you that, because my mother was teaching English in the house, and I was very much looked after some nannies, and I hated that, and I would run away from the nannies every time, and they used to come back on their own without me. So that was kind of the start of my life.
And why were you entrusted to nannies?
Well, I didn't like the nannies. I wanted my mother, but she was busy teaching, you see. She was teaching at home. She was teaching English. My mother studied in England, came home and became a teacher of English, which she did in the house. And I resented it, I think, very much. Although, with hindsight, it was very good because I learned a lot of English, which I wouldn't have done because I was brought up on 3 languages, German, Polish, and English.
And of course, your mother gave you an English name because she was an Anglophile, is that right?
Yeah, because she was in England. She had a friend called Kitty, and she decided that was going to be my name. That's the reason I'm called Kitty.
Felix.
And
Yeah.
I haven't got another name.
So are you saying then that were it not for the nannies, that you'd have been an angelic child, and you would never have done any wrong?
No, probably not. Probably not. I was sent to a convent school.
Say no more.
To get me into line.
Into line, yeah. Indeed. And I remember you telling me a story once about being sent home even from a family holiday for misbehaviour. Can you tell us?
Terrible things on holiday. I once got a canoe and couldn't come back, and came back with it on the train, and my parents didn't know. Yeah, and I arrived home by train with a canoe. Yeah, I did them awful.
As one does.
I can't tell you all the episodes that occurred.
Tell us about the time you were sent home for a skiing incident.
I had loads of skiing incidents. I used to sneak out at night and go skiing at night. And of course that was forbidden because we went to a proper ski school, a residential place. And I used to get out and it was a lovely moonlight and it was beautiful. And I used to like to do this, but that was forbidden.
Yes.
So I like to do all the stuff that was forbidden.
So quite an independently spirited young lady.
It was a useful thing during the war, yeah.
I'm sure it was. Well, that moves us on because there's a marvellous clip of you talking about your attitude when the Germans first invaded. So you were in Bielsko, and then you had to move on to Lublin. But I'd like to just show this quick clip of the first documentary made, I think it was in 1979, with Yorkshire TV. That is where you're describing what was going through your head when the Germans invaded. Here it is.
When the Germans invaded Poland in September 1939, Bielsko was immediately threatened. The Felix family fled to Lublin. A month later, the victorious Nazi army had caught up with them.
I'd never seen Germans before, and I thought they looked absolutely splendid. They had these fantastic uniforms and black boots, and I remember them marching across the city with the sergeant major, waving his baton and conducting a military band, and I was most fascinated. And my father used to run after me and pull me home and not allow me out, and I couldn't understand why. I thought, oh, these marvellous soldiers, why am I not allowed to go and see them? And so I used to sneak out and just watch the parades.
Fabulous. Not many people reacted like that, I'm sure. So tell us a bit about what happened next, how your family came to be separated and how you ended up in Germany.
What happened was, because we were so close to the frontiers and close to Germany, everybody fled the town. And you couldn't get any transport. Eventually, we got as far as the town of Lublin. We thought it'd be safe because it was quite a far east. But in fact, of course, it was very close to the Russian border. And at first we thought, man, maybe that's what we should do. We should run further east and get into Russia. Everything else was already occupied. But we actually got stranded because we took my grandmother, and of course she couldn't keep up. And so we were stranded in Lublin, and that was the beginning of the ghetto.
And then tell us what happened next, in terms of how you started to cope with that and how the family decided to operate.
Well, it was easier for children to operate in the ghetto. So my mother would teach English, by the way, in the ghetto in return for food, because we didn't have any money at that point anymore. My father couldn't go out because as soon as men went outside, they were grabbed and never seen again. So it was actually for the children who kept life going in the ghetto. And it was up to me to go and try and get onto the non-Jewish side to get some food for us in return for other goods that we still had. Yeah, so that was life in the ghetto. And at first, of course, a lot of worse things happened in the ghetto. Mm-hmm. As we know, the ghetto was liquidated in the end. And we did escape. We tried to escape because the Russian frontier wasn't very far. We tried to cross over, but it just wasn't possible. We were stranded by that time.
And what was the point at which the male Felixes and the females split?
My mother was still teaching in a vicarage, and the priest who befriended my mother said, "Look, what you've got to do is you've got to get out of Poland. That's the thing to do, and you've got to try and get into Germany. There was nowhere else to go; everything else was occupied." And he did obtain for us some documents. The problem was we couldn't take my father The priest said, no way can the three of you go and all go together. So we had to split up. At that point, my brother had already fled further east. So we had to part with my father at that point. That's the last time I saw my father, in fact, in hiding in outside Lublin in the village. And so my mother and I simply boarded a train that was heading towards Germany. And by that time, we already had documents that showed that we were not Jewish. So I had a new name, I had a new identity, I had to learn a new thing. Fortunately, it was someone of my age, but I had a birth certificate which showed that I wasn't Jewish. The name was Leokadia Dobrzyńska. So I had to learn all that in my head to have my new identity. And the next thing the priest said, you got to get out of Poland. So a lot of Poles were rounded up and taken to Germany to work in factories. And the priest said, that's what you've got to do. You've got to wait until there's a roundup, be rounded up, allow yourself to be rounded up, and you will be taken into Germany. And this is exactly what happened. So we had new documents, my mother and I. Well, none of us looked particularly Jewish anyway.
No.
And we headed into Germany. So both my mother and I had new identities. My mother's name was Sulewska, but she was no longer my mother, so that was another complication.
Yes.
She was supposed to be my aunt, and my name was Dobrzyńska, was a different name, different documents, but our documents were in order. So
who chose your names, Kitty? Who did you choose the names? Who chose those names, Leokadia? And
no, that was on the identity that I had been given. I had been given these papers, and it said Leokadia Dobrzyńska, and I had to assume that name, which I learned to do, and then both of us were in a train and allowed ourselves to be transported into Germany, where they were rounding up forced labor Poles.
They were labor camp, yeah.
They were rounding up Poles to work in Germany, and that's exactly what happened. And so we landed up in a place called Bitterfeld, which was the IG Farben industry.
And RG Farben were the chemicals company that made the gas.
Right. So that's where we landed up. Had no idea where we were going to be, but that's where we landed up.
But you got found out.
Well, eventually, I'm afraid eventually we got found out, yes. And our documents were traced back, I think that's what happened. And to cut a long story short, we were taken to the Gestapo headquarters, and we were to be executed because we entered Germany illegally. The 3 charges: we entered the country illegally, we had documents that didn't belong to us, and they suspected we were Jewish. So we had 3 things, 3 offenses that carried the death penalty, and we were sentenced to death. And we were, at the end of that period, there were 13 of us who turned out to be Jewish that were sentenced to death. And we went through a mock execution. We were taken out one night to be executed. And all the machine guns were there. And we had to stand with our arms, I think, up like that, against the wall, against a brick wall. And the machine guns were at the back of us. And then there was a huge noise, bang. And some of the girls fell to the ground. But in fact, they shot into the air just to frighten us.
Yes.
Oh, they said, no, we're not going to shoot you like that. We need to know where these documents came from. Who gave them to you? How did you manage to come illegally into Germany? Anyway, cut a long story short, we're taken to the Gestapo headquarters, and we were put in a proper prison in Bitterfeld and Halle an der Saale, which was the very large prison.
And is that the point then at which they commuted the death sentence to being sent to Auschwitz?
Say it again. Sorry,
is that the point? So it was a mock execution.
Yes.
But in fact, we're not going to execute you.
Exactly.
We want to find out the truth, and therefore we're sending you to Auschwitz.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that happened. Yeah.
And I remember you saying, another sort of hallmark of your attitude is that others were saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that we're going to hell, it's going to be horrendous, it's going to be awful, and you said, well, we'll see our enemy there and we'll have something to fight.
Yes, exactly. Well, the reason was that we were in this one cell, like a transit collecting cell, and there were all these inscriptions on the wall. See you in Auschwitz, we see you in hell. And my mother turned and she said, oh, she knew the place Auschwitz because it wasn't all that far from my hometown. She said, but there was nothing there. It's just fields there. There's nothing there, because we had no idea what Auschwitz was at that point. It was just a small village.
Well, look, let's move on to that. I guess it's the central episode of your story. But as I said at the outset, we're not going to go through it blow by blow. But I would like to set the scene again with another clip from that same 79 documentary. Now, this is a documentary in which Kitty went back to Auschwitz for the very first time in 30 odd years. Took her other son, not Peter, David, with her. And as we've already established, Kitty is a fairly durable and resilient sort. But I think you'll just get an understanding of what it must have been like for Kitty to go back to this place for the first time. Let's have a look.
And there was just this one road approaching through.
Well, this was the main road to bring the people to the gas chambers, this very road. David, this was the most important place of all. See this gate?
Yeah.
Let me tell you about this gate. Now, the commandant stood here, the SS women, that's where they stood. People came to work, external work from there, from the camp. 5 o'clock in the morning, the groups went out to work, outside, digging trenches, doing what you like, right? People who went that way never came back, right? So this was the way of life.
That way led to the crematoria?
That's the way to the crematoria, right? So here, if you were brought in through this gate, you could live for a bit. But if you went that way, you never lived. That was the end. That was the way to die.
I think the sound was very bad of that clip. I apologize.
I can explain it.
Kitty, why don't you explain it?
Well, we came to you have to show me the clip again because I've forgotten exactly what it was. I think
you're at the crossroads. So you were taking David down that long.
I think I was explaining the crossroad, wasn't I?
Yes. Yeah.
That's right. And I was showing David what happened at the crossroad. Yeah, but I can't remember the clip.
Well, at the crossroads was, you either went one way or the other.
That's right. That's right. That was the main street of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and then there was a point of crossroad. If you went straight on, you went to the gas chambers. If you turned left, you got into the camp. You're just seeing the gate now, and so people who were allowed to live went through this gate. Others who went straight, there was the gas chambers, the other end.
Now, the reason I wanted everybody to see the clip was because you were again, we couldn't hear, but you were very emotional at that point. And given your robustness and given some of the stuff we're going to show next, I just think it's important that people understand how brave it was of you to face your demons and actually go back to this place of horror. So.
Can I say something at this point?
Sure.
I needed to go back to make sure that what's in my head is actually true. It was a confirmation of what I knew.
Yes.
And I wanted to confirm it. That's the reason. That was one of the reasons I needed to go back.
I see. Yeah, I get that. Well, anyway, so it's 1943. By this time, isn't it? You arrive at Auschwitz with your mum. What was your first 24 hours like?
I don't think I can possibly explain to you, because it's not something you can explain. You've got to go and see it. I mean, that we were first of all, you go into a place where they shave you, all your hair, everything, smear you with some green fluid, and throw you some rags to wear. And we were given...
Sorry, the green fluid is to delouse.
Yeah, well, sort of delouse, but in fact it didn't. But you got a prisoner uniform. Russian prisoners of war were killed at that point where we were, and we got their uniforms. So the first thing they threw to you was this Russian prisoner of war uniform. That's it. And that's how I came into Auschwitz.
Now, I was very struck by you talking about, well, I think it was your first night, and you met, I think it was a gypsy, German.
Oh, yeah, I'll tell you about the gypsy, okay. Well, there were 1,000 women in that hut, 1,000. Can you imagine 1,000 in one place? My mother and I scrambled somewhere, and I was lying next to a woman, and I was getting colder and colder, and I was freezing cold. And it turned out I was lying next to a dead body. And that's why I was so cold. And that was a gypsy that had died during the night. So I said to my mother, I know what's got to be done. She said, what are we going to do? I said, look, we've got no clothes. We've got these prisoner of war uniforms. We can't walk around in these. We've got this dead woman. She's died. It's no good to her. We must have all of the stuff that she's got. And that's the very first time that I took things of people that had died. Yes. And that was the way to survive, believe it or not.
Well,
Take from the dead, because you were not doing anyone any harm doing that. And that was a logical thing to do.
Yes. So you were quite clear thinking even at this terrible moment.
It just came to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you describe it in one of your books actually as having a tunnel vision and thinking like an animal. Exactly
that. Yeah.
So there's I hope the next clip that I'd like to show is I hope the sound is audible this time. But I just think it shows your raw guts. You're with David and you come across Block 20. Which is where you were. It
was in many blocks, so one was Block 20.
Let's have a look at how you explain how you walk into that place with David.
Oh, okay.
But really my function was to bring the bodies out that died. People died during the night, and some of the bodies were up there. So two of us had to climb up there and get the corpses down, drag them all the way and stack them up outside. And I actually hid some of my friends here. But I told them it was the most dangerous place to be, because nearly every day the SS doctors would come in and carry out selections. They would sit people up. Sometimes they had to jump. If they couldn't jump over this heating channel, they'd be killed. Of course, the sick couldn't get down, so the SS doctors would just, with a chalk, mark up a bunk.
That wasn't the clip I meant, actually. That was the infirmary, of course. But let's talk about that, because it's also very interesting. So I should just explain to the people watching that that's from another documentary that you made much more recently with the Shoah Foundation, Stephen Smith, one of our co-founders, and then currently runs the US Shoah Foundation, and I think you made that with him. And those two girls are, one of them is Stephen's daughter, is it not? Kitty? Natalia, and you wanted to, in a sense, recreate the recipe that you did when you took David, right? You went back and took these two young girls around. It's quite an effective formula, isn't it? So, so you're in the, we've jumped forward a bit in the story, I think, to where your mother had got you a job in the infirmary, which was, high chance of you staying alive, and you're talking it through it. Now, the bit that clip talks about in particular, of course, is the process by which Mengele did the selections, and you're shown putting the cross of chalk on.
Right.
So how did you come to be there, though? How did your mother get you that job? in the infirmary?
Well, when my mother arrived in Birkenau, because she was one of the oldest, and the reason she was allowed in is because we think they still wanted her to be interrogated. Otherwise, she would not have been allowed into the camp. She was probably one of the oldest people in the camp. So the women, some of the women who already had better jobs, they felt they needed to look after her because there wasn't such a mother figure anywhere. So my mother was greatly admired for that. And she did wonderful work, my mother, just by talking to people, being able to keep them alive just by speaking to people. So she was absolutely fantastic.
What would you say to keep them alive? How do you mean?
She was begging them to live another day.
So she's willing them on.
Willing them on. Come on, don't give up. Just keep going. Exactly.
So are you more like your mother then? I mean, she sounds also like a pretty resilient lady.
No, I don't think so. But at that point, I wasn't like this. No. I mean, I did realize that you got to fight for your living there. Yeah.
Yes. Well,
to stay alive.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the talk about your mother, but if I understand correctly, she wasn't part day to day of the groups that you formed. This is sort of a central theme I'd like you to talk about, if you would, of how your survival technique, as it were, that what the women did in the camps that the men didn't or couldn't.
Yes, quite. There was a big difference between how men survived and how women survived. Now, I wouldn't really know exactly how men survived, but women survived better because they formed little units or little families, and they protected one another in that respect. And the best way was to have like 4 people together. So one person was working somewhere with clothes, one person was working somewhere perhaps in the kitchen, one person was perhaps digging potatoes. In that way, by mutual sort of help, you could survive better than if you were a solitary person, which the men were more solitary, I think. That was the difference between men's survival and women's survival.
So but there were quite practical functions to each member of the little family unit.
Oh, yes. You wouldn't accept a family unit if it didn't contribute.
Yes.
Everybody had to be able to contribute something.
Yes.
If it was just one carrot or one piece of potato or perhaps somewhere to sleep or a blanket or something like that. So, yes, so it needed people to join together. If they couldn't do that, then they couldn't survive.
But it sounds like that's a very practical response, with each person in the little family unit having, their practical job to do, without which they wouldn't be part of the family. I get that. But why did it occur to women to be like that and not the men? I
don't know. I think you had women that looked at younger women. So the older women looked at the younger women. They looked at it in that sort of relationship, I think. Yeah. Whereas men, yes, you had men that two men that would get together, but I don't think they got together like a unit, like women did. I don't think so.
And what about when people on the sort of more emotional side, when one of your family would fall ill, did the women in the unit look after each other?
Well, it wasn't always possible. One minute your friends were there, the next minute they were gone, and you had to find somebody else. So it wasn't an option, because most of the time there's nothing you could do to help. Unless you were in some particular position in the camp, which I never was. No.
Yes. But actually, you mentioned special positions in the camp. Didn't you? I don't think it was quite at this time. I think it was later on. But didn't you form a particularly strong friendship that lasted for her entire life?
Yes.
With someone who was a loiferer, one of the runners.
Yeah, that's right. There was a whole family came together. There was Henya, which was my friend. Not at that point. She came. Her father was taken to the men's camp. Her mother and her sister and her cousin. So they were all together. And she was brought in by the SS herself. The commandant from wherever she was, I think a ghetto, brought her in and the whole family, and immediately handed her over to the commandant, and she was given a job as a messenger girl. They had these messenger girls going from camp to camp taking messages, because there were no telephones or no mobiles or anything like that. So she became one of those messenger girls.
One of the loitering, yeah.
Which was a very good function, wasn't it?
Yes.
I didn't know her at that point at all. I didn't get to know her and her mother until we were evacuated, and we were evacuated together, and that's where we formed the unit together, Henya and I, and her sister and her mother and my mother. So we were all a unit together to survive together. Yeah, but it was after Auschwitz.
How did people like Henya get the job as a runner?
Well, that's a good question. I think she got the job already when she was in the ghetto. That she must have already had a job in the ghetto. And so the SS themselves from the ghetto brought her, handed her over to one of the commandants. Obviously, they wanted to save her, I presume. That's what happened. They tried to save her. That's how she got the job. I mean, people mostly got the jobs of some sort of pretext. It didn't just come out of the blue. You know, not anybody could just get the job.
But didn't they have to have certain qualities, you know, brains or languages or looks?
Languages, yes. Brains, it didn't matter. As long as they were ruthless, I think. That's the point. Ruthless. Yes.
Yeah.
Totally ruthless.
And I think you also, good looks helped, didn't they?
It sure helped. If you were beautiful, it helped. That's right. That's how Henya came into the camp. She was very beautiful. Yeah.
And that's a picture of her there, actually, living in LA.
I did bring a picture in to show you.
Lady. Yeah.
That's not the picture that I gave, actually. There should be another one. That's it. That's my picture.
Yes.
That's one of my pictures. That's right.
Yeah.
She was very beautiful.
We actually found another picture. I don't know if we've got it. We might have one.
I've got loads of pictures of her, actually.
But there's one of her daughter. I mean, because she was so beautiful, apparently, that Mengele said, "You're too beautiful to be Jewish."
Yeah.
And after the war,
possibly.
Because this was quite a fated story in Germany, when she got married on a wedding day, she was on the front cover of a magazine in Germany in her wedding dress, which you probably can't see the picture well enough, but that's her daughter holding up that magazine cover.
I have got a picture of her wedding dress somewhere. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah. Okay. Just to move back then to the notion of women sticking together, looking after each other, you know, having these roles and everything. Didn't you also literally, you both helped and were a helper of hiding people under dead bodies or under straw mattresses as all part of the web? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, there were people that were on the verge of being taken away, okay? Perhaps they had some disability, perhaps they were ill or whatever. The only way you could save people was to hide them somehow. So the answer was to hide them underneath a straw mattress, put a body on top so that they didn't see these people. I was hidden like this when I had typhus. My mother hid me under a straw mattress, put another body on top of me, because I was unconscious. I had typhus for about 3 months, and I was completely deranged at that point. And that's how we kept people alive, to hide them away underneath another body, because there were selections in the camp nearly every day, and anyone that couldn't stand up would be taken to be killed straight away.
I mean, Kitty, the reason why I wanted to focus on this aspect of your story is obviously it's incredible in and of itself, but I think it's so important in terms of education that people know the bravery, the tenacity, the resourcefulness of so many Jewish people, women very much included, if not more so, in acts of resistance to the Nazis. I think there's a common perception of just passive victimhood And your whole story demonstrates the very opposite.
Because people have a notion that the Jews went to the slaughter like sheep.
Absolutely.
But it's absolutely not true. Take it from me.
Yeah.
That's not true. There was huge resistance. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the point, really, ultimately, of this story, as far as I'm concerned, for tonight anyway. And dare I say it, I'm always told off for getting into politics, but tough, I'm going to. I think the difference between someone like you and perhaps some people in political movements today, in the Black Lives Matters movement, is that there's a sense of victimhood in those other cases today about stuff that was hundreds of years ago, and it's being used as a reason today to make excuses and to not to build bridges, but to actually divide people from each other. Whereas I feel with you, your whole story, everything you did is about A, demonstrating, real human strength, and B, you're not doing it to score political points. You're doing it to whether you mean to or not, to inspire.
Well, we try to save our friends, our relatives. That's what we try to do. Yeah.
And talking about wanting to save others, that's we talked about this, about that very basic animal instinct to survive. There must have been many times when you thought, I just can't go on.
Oh, yes, there were days like that. And the worst days were when you lost all your friends. When one minute your friends were here, the next minute they've been taken away. That was. What
gave you the strength then to not give in? Where did you summon the energy to?
I don't know, you just knew you had to. I think it was the anger as well of why you were there that drove you on to spur you on to continue. Yeah. To live another day, like my mother used to say, just live another day.
Yeah, take each day at a time.
Yeah, she used to. That was her favorite expression. Yeah.
Well, it worked. You did say though that you. I remember you saying earlier this week that actually sometimes when the going got really tough, you may have given up if it was just for yourself, but you felt that you had to carry on for your mother.
Yeah, well, that's right. Because the roles were very often reversed. Like I had to look after my mother rather than she looked after me.
Yeah.
Because I could perhaps manage to get things for her that she couldn't get for herself.
Yes.
So yes, the roles were reversed, very much so. And certainly on the death march, we had to carry my mother at one point. Yeah.
We'll come on to that in a second. I just want to cover one last part of the Auschwitz bit in outline, which is...
There's too much of Auschwitz to be able to explain.
But maybe just the Canada section, how you came to be in Canada and what it was. I think.
Yeah, well, let me explain what Canada was.
Please.
People think Canada meant Canada. Canada in Auschwitz meant that there was a loads of everything, of goods. People would come in with all their possessions. That's all people's possessions, and that was Canada. It was nicknamed Canada because it was sort of nicknamed as the wealth. And of course, there was enormous wealth. People came with all their best jewelry, but I mean that. Sometimes big pouches of jewelry that we found. And we couldn't do anything with it. We just had to give it up because you couldn't eat it. So if you couldn't eat it, it wasn't any good to you.
Yeah.
You couldn't hand it over to anyone.
So this was...
understand. Sorry?
Let's have a look at a little video where you actually show the girls, your young companions, around this complex of...
I'm going to tell you why I've brought you here. Thousands upon thousands of people were brought in with all their belongings.
Yeah.
Kitty really wanted to tell the story of Canada. For her, it's about evidence. Each one of those suitcases belonged to a human being, and each one of those coats was worn by one of those human beings. What she's trying to get across to us, I think, is just the scale of the killing based on the scale of that site.
There were 30 sheds here, all full of people's belongings, and we were here to do the sorting of the belongings.
How long were you working here for?
I was here 8 months. There were 2 pathways.
Yeah.
That pathway at the bottom had a huge heap, like 3-story high. Everybody's things jumbled up. All the suitcases were emptied there. Documents, children's clothes, prams, everything was jumbled up down the bottom there. And then it was taken to individual sheds, and there it was sorted.
So, as you say, that was the Effektenlager. That was the official name, wasn't it? The warehouse of effects and
Exactly. Effektenkammer, that's it.
comma.
Effects.
So, and Canada, because it was a nickname of Canada, was perceived to be a land of wealth, and there was a wealth of riches. Yeah. But your job specifically there, Kitty?
I was on night shift. I was on permanent night shift, and my job was sorting nothing but men's jackets. So I had to go into that big pile of jumble and find men's jackets. And what I had to do, I had to put them on a trestle, like a table. I had to open up all the seams because people were hiding jewelry and all valuables inside the seams. So we had to open up, and we found enormous amount of wealth in people's jackets, especially men's jackets. It was all in the seams and then down the sides and inside the linings. So we had to find all that. Reason being that was all taken into Germany, distributed to the Germans, and they didn't want people to find all these things, would they?
Of course.
Because it was all stolen.
Of course. Of course.
Right. So we had to make sure that there was nothing there. And at the same time, everything that we found was just dumped into a bucket. And of course, they helped themselves, the SS, to all that jewelry. Yes.
Of course. Am I right in saying that there was paper money as well?
Well, paper money was very useful because we didn't have any toilet paper. Right? A simple thing like toilet paper didn't exist. And what did we do? We used paper money. And it was a good thing to do. Yes, it's one thing, it didn't fall into German hands, and the other thing, it was useful.
Of course. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And I think as well, in terms of just this organization into female groups, am I right in saying, though, that wherever you could put to one side or bury some of those possessions, you then try and pass them on to the men?
Well, we were not allowed any contact with men. Certainly not when I was working in Canada. But men came in to dump all the suitcases, and what they did, they just dumped them, opened them, and then they brought the next lot of suitcases from the railway, from the station where people were being deported. They had to leave all the luggage, and all that was brought by the men, and then it was being sorted. That was the Canada job, sorting. But the men brought all the stuff in. So we were constantly under supervision of the SS and capos, the capos, if you know what I mean. Nonetheless, we tried to save some of this stuff because we did know it's going to come in handy in case of an uprising. And that's exactly what happened. We did manage to smuggle through to the men stuff that they couldn't get for them to enable them to do an uprising, which eventually did happen.
Yeah. Just want to pick up on the point about the use of the paper money, and not for the sake of it being a toilet subject, but there's another clip that I hope we can show of when you show, again, David, from that first documentary you made, you show him around the toilet block, and it's not so much the facts themselves because they're not terribly pleasant, but it's your attitude, your resilience, and even, may I say, black humor when you're showing him around. Let's show the clip and you'll see what I mean.
Now, one was sitting here, or perhaps 3 were sitting here, because you couldn't just have one hole to yourself. So you were sitting sort of like this, and somebody else was sitting there, you see. And then before you finished, somebody pushed you off because the other one wanted to go, you see. But then somebody had to work in the Scheißkommando. Now the Scheißkommando, God, it's too bloody funny, really. The Scheißkommando was a work group, people who had to dig that stuff out, put it in buckets, and carry it to the cesspool. Now, I worked on the Scheißkommando for some time also, because I've worked in most work parties here, and the Scheißkommando was very good, because you had a bar at the back here, and 2 buckets. And then you sort of carried the shit in each bucket, you see, across the shoulder, and you carried it to the cesspool. It was emptied at the back there. So you carried the shit, actually. You had to empty this into buckets and carried it. And that was a very good work party, because, you see, you were actually working inside the enclosure of the camp. It was very prestigious to be in a Scheißkommando.
You were saying David couldn't take that in at all, Kitty. I'm not surprised. I mean, it's quite shocking stuff. But your matter-of-factness, and then is.
Well, I was working there, you know, digging out the shit in the cesspool for days on end. So it became second nature.
I guess. But he was just overwhelmed, speechless.
Well, no, he couldn't understand it. He really,
literally couldn't understand.
He literally couldn't understand it. No, he didn't actually sink in. He kept on saying, "What's this? What's this?" I said, "It's a pile of shit. Can't you see?"
Amazing. Yeah. Well, again, you're incredible in facing this stuff. Anyway, let's move on from that. Tell us a bit about how you finally got out, the evacuation. You mentioned the inquiry, which I think was the beginning of the end of Canada. Tell us about that.
Well, I was transferred back to the main camp, and I went. I know what you mean. I had to somehow find a way to get back from the main camp, having worked in Canada. And you couldn't just say, "Oh, please, can I go back?" or anything like that. That's right. Well, as a matter of fact, I don't know whether you do know, so my mother approached one of the commandants and said to him, "My daughter's been working in Canada for so long, and I'm being evacuated, and I'd like her to be, please, evacuated with me. Could it be possible for her to be transferred?" That's what actually happened. It's my mother was instrumental in getting me out of there.
So I think that was Franz Hössler. Was that?
I think it was, yes, Franz Hössler. Yeah.
So he was I think.
He wasn't. You could actually approach him, and my mother approached him in her best German. So yes, he was instrumental in having me transferred back to the main camp. And then I was evacuated to my mother, because I was separated from my mother for about 8 months.
Yes. But the fact of asking, as your mother on the screen now, again, amazingly brave to make the request. I guess many wouldn't, right?
Well, my mother spoke a perfect German, and she got herself all cleaned up and dressed up. And she walked up there, and they thought, "Oh, what's this old woman doing in the camp?" I presume that's what they probably thought. And she said, "Prisoner number 39933 begs to speak to the commandant." And he said, "Yes." And because you couldn't just approach them, you had to approach to a couple, and she had to relate. But he said, "Yes, speak to them." In other words, speak. And so she asked him, "Could he please do this transfer?" And I must have done, because I was transferred, back to my mother.
If ever there was an example of making
my mother wouldn't have survived the evacuation without me at that point.
No,
we were on the death march, and at some point we had to carry my mother. Yes.
Well, but let's not underestimate what she did in that moment of going out to this guy. And there's a picture of Hössler on the screen now. I think that's actually at Belsen, not at Auschwitz. But
yes, he was
your archetypal Nazi killer. I mean, he's had pride in standing in front of a pile of corpses. So, and your mother had the presence to make the request to him calmly. It's amazing.
Can I say something?
Yes.
He was executed But we knew already that these people were being executed. And my mother and I went into Belsen after the war and tried to plead to, not to give him the death sentence.
Did you?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, he was instrumental in transferring me from Canada to back to the camp. And so when we got to know that he's being executed or whatever, we tried to save him. But nobody wanted to listen to our story.
It's remarkable, though, that you did that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Did he know that? Did he get wind that you were trying to stop his execution?
Well, I presume so. We went to see the authorities, yes, in Belsen itself. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You've mentioned the Death March a couple of times. Let's just move on to that part of it. As again, tremendous resilience through horrendous times. Just to set the scene again, it was in horrendous, inhospitable weather. You were pretty much barefoot, I think. It was over 2 to 3 weeks, I think. Is that right, Kitty? Stephen Smith, in I think one of the other documentaries you made with him. Steve,
yes,
by the way, those don't know, it was when Steve, in that last but one clip, it was Stephen Smith that was talking about you.
Yeah.
I know you're very close, and if he's watching, hello, Stephen. I hope he is. But there's this lovely moment where you made a program retracing your steps of that death march.
Yeah.
And then you were 70 or something like that. So to do
in the 70s, I think I went with Stephen. Yeah.
So that's something in itself. But there's a scene here which shows us what the conditions were like and how you and Stephen coped with it. Let's have a look at the clip.
That's right.
The first night was spent on the flat, on the frozen ground, in the snow. No, nobody said more than one word, The guards would string you under. Well, bang, down you went. Straight down, like this. You can lie
in the snow, wherever you were?
It doesn't matter, And you lie on top of me, see? And you change over.
So what happens when you're down there? Do you just freeze to death on the snow?
No, strange enough you didn't, The snow was dry. You could manage about half an hour. And then you'd have to change over and somebody else would lie down. But, you're just an animal and nothing else, aren't you? And you got an instinct. So what do? One single animal could survive. So we were just like penguins. But then you had a lot of people that had never been to Auschwitz. They didn't realise that you do need collective help. And they just couldn't survive.
Let's get out of here, because we've been here for 2 hours, never mind 6 days. I'm frozen.
I'm hot.
He didn't like the blizzard.
Did you hear what you said to him at the end? Did you hear? He said he was you could see he was freezing cold. The snow was coming into his eyes. You could barely see. And he said, "Come on, let's get out of here, freezing." He said, "Oh, all right, then I'm hot." Wonderful.
We were rolling in the snow. Yeah, it was just a fluke that we had this big snowfall. We were waiting for snow to do this filming.
For the filming, yes. You got lucky in that sense.
Yeah.
You even got unlucky. Again, some remarkable stories from that Death March experience. Tell us a bit about, again, some of your survival techniques.
Well, the survival techniques on the Death March, you mean?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, at one point, we got to a summit of the Great Owl Mountains, by the way. The Great Owl was the peak.
Yes.
And we got to the top.
Oh, this is the Sudeten Mountains, isn't it?
The Sudeten Mountains, the border of the Czech Republic and Germany.
Yes.
Okay. It was a mountain range. And we got there, and it was a flat area when we got to the top. We were climbing up a hill, probably about 10,000 women at that point. At one point, we were 100 women, but we were joined by all these different evacuation parties, and we were around about 10,000. So it was very, very important to stay in the front because they were shooting people at the rear and at the sides. So you always had to stay if you could. And we had to take my mother, sometimes had to carry my mother, to stay in the front of the column so that we're not lagging behind. And we got to the top, and there was a flat area, And we couldn't believe our eyes. We got to the top and there were people picnicking on the top. So there were actually Germans running away from the Russian front. They were running away from the homeland, from their home. And they were sort of eating and drinking on carts. And it took our Auschwitz group, and we were like always stuck together, 2 seconds to understand the situation. We overrun this whole convoy that there was and grabbed all their food if we could, and there were sausages hanging there, and all sorts of manner of food that we didn't see for about a week. And so we overrun this group, and our guards couldn't shoot because we were mixed up with the Germans. So they were just clubbing people with rifle butts. I got hit on my head with a rifle butt at that point. Anyway, we did manage to grab some food, and at one point I didn't know what it was, but there was a bucket hanging on one of these carts. I loosened one of these, I took it off and grabbed it. And what did I find inside the bucket? A whole lot of lard. And I thought, what are we going to do with this lard? We couldn't eat it. Oh, my mother was absolutely jubilant. She said, we're going to smear it on our bodies, on our feet. We were barefoot at that point in the snow. And so we used this fat that we had, smeared it all our hands, on our faces, on our heads. We were bare. We had no hair at that point, don't forget. So we were shaved, no scarves, nothing. Mm-hmm. Absolutely freezing cold. And my mother said, that's absolutely marvelous. That's what we need, a lot of fat. And that was manna from heaven, she said. It came from nowhere. And then that's it. That was part of my death march. Yeah.
Amazing.
There wasn't any food, but we had this lard.
Oh, you had insulation. Yeah, fantastic. Listen, I'm conscious of time, Kitty. Could we move to the next part of your story? We'll try, are you okay for another 10 minutes or so? Are you okay to carry on?
I'm okay. I'm fine.
Great. Okay. And I also want to bring Peter and Moira back in as well.
Yes.
I haven't forgotten about them as well. But just to very quickly cover your time in the DP camp and then how that set the displaced persons camp after the war and how that set the agenda, I suppose, for you as Kitty, the testifier, the first person in Britain, first survivor in Britain to give their testimony. I was very struck when you showed us the other day, last week, the actual notes that you wrote even before you got to England in the DP camp. In English, when English wasn't your first language. I think we've got a picture of it on the screen now. That's your very own handwriting.
Oh, did I? I can't remember.
September 1946.
Yes, I did it for the Quaker Relief Team, by the way.
Why? What did they ask? Or
no, the Quaker Relief Team were looking after us after liberation. There was a whole team of a Quaker Relief Team who were looking after us, and they basically brought us back over to England as well. The Quaker Relief Team, one of the people who I worked with.
But if you get an indication of your spirit again, if we can just get that clip back, I'm trying to read it. What you say is
I can't remember that.
I wish other people all over the world could have some understanding for the facts! ! From
I didn't know.
From my own experience, ex-prisoner 39934.
Yes. Well, I wrote this for the Quaker Relief Teams. They asked me, can you get something on paper? Well, of course, I couldn't write in English, you can imagine. But that was my first effort, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so you and your mum then got over to England, set up life in Birmingham.
Yeah.
But the difficulties, of course, weren't over there. I know that you first lived with an uncle and your cousins. That's a picture of you, I think, still when leaving the DP camp. But that's the picture.
That's on the way to England, at the back of an ambulance, because the Quakers used these ambulances to move around. They didn't have any other cars.
Yes.
We were always at the back of the ambulance. Yes.
You look pretty happy in it, as I'm sure you were.
That's on the way. That's on the way to England.
Yes.
They took us to the docks, in fact. Yeah.
But England wasn't as wonderful as you had hoped. Tell us why not.
It was no. I at one point, if I hadn't had to be here because of my mother, I would have gone back to the DP camp and started again. No,
tell us why.
I was very, very unhappy. Yes, well, I was made to go and work in a hospital, which was totally alien to me anyway. And my uncle said, "Well, you've got to earn your living somehow." And in the end, I managed to train as a radiographer. I didn't want to do any nursing, and I did agree that I would be working in a hospital, but I wanted to do something else. And then I was very impressed with all the X-ray machinery that I saw, and I thought that'd be something different for me to do. And I trained to be a radiographer, yeah.
So you managed to secure a career, basically.
Career, yeah. No, I did. I had to do all my exams. I had to do all my exams. I had to relearn all my subjects that I'd missed. Yes, which I had to pass an examination. Yes, examination.
And at the same time, you were dealing with an uncle and a family that weren't interested in your past.
No, not remotely, I'm afraid.
Why was that? What's the story there?
I don't know. I think my uncle was a funny sort of person. I think that's what it was. I mean, my aunt was a doctor. She worked at the accident hospital for years and years. But I didn't get on with my uncle, and he was the dominant figure, and my cousins totally ignored me. I think they were told not to ask me too many questions on what happened during the war, so I was not allowed to talk about it. That was the very first thing that happened. I don't want to know, and I don't want my girls upset. That was my cousins. I was told specifically I mustn't talk to my cousins about what had happened.
How'd that make you feel?
Well, I was absolutely, I wanted to go back. I wanted to go back, start again, back to the displaced persons camp and start all over again. Yeah.
But you didn't.
No, I didn't, because I had my mother.
You had your mother, and you were writing. You'd started writing what became your first book.
Yeah, I was encouraged to try and write, and that's what I tried to do. But of course, I couldn't write English very well. I'd never had a lesson in English. I could speak it because I heard it from my mother who was teaching, but I've never had a formal lesson. My mother always said, "Oh, what, it can wait, it can wait. You've got all the other languages. You've got French at school, you've got Latin, you've got this." So I was told that has to wait.
Yeah. So, but you persevered. I think your first book came out, decades before many others in 61.
My first book came out in 1961 called I Am Alive.
And am I not right in saying that you probably mounted what was Britain's first ever Holocaust exhibition?
I had my own exhibition.
Well, that was Britain's first, I think. When was that?
Well, I made contact with the Auschwitz Museum, and they were just starting up there. And I said to them, I want to bring some of that stuff here to show people what there was. And they said yes. So I had quite a lot of stuff that was sent to me from Auschwitz itself, after, all manner of stuff. And documents were very important. And I started my own exhibition. Yeah, they sent me.
Roughly when was that, Kitty?
Oh, gosh.
Early 50s, late 40s, around about then?
No, I think it was the beginning of the late 50s.
Late 50s, okay.
Or perhaps even the beginning of the 60s. Well, I had two small children in the meantime as well.
Of course, as well, yeah. One of whom we're going to see in a minute.
I was working in the hospital. I had to look after the children, and I wanted to do that work as well. So
let's bring Peter and Moira in, because we got Peter in a picture, the lovely picture of the family. Peter, David, you and your husband. Is Peter there? There's Peter and Moira.
Yes, he's here.
Yes, I'm here.
I mean, you know this story inside out, but what do you think when you hear that Kitty, first person on these shores to write about her experiences, literally decades before anybody else could face their past? She goes and she's having a terrible time in England, trying to struggle to establish a career, bring up a family, gets the radiographer gig, but has a nightmare to contend with the uncle and the cousins, and then still manages to get in touch with people at Auschwitz, get artifacts and put on an exhibition. I mean, extraordinary, no?
Absolutely. And I think it's an illustration of her determination. And I think this is one of the things that you were particularly interested in when we spoke earlier on in the week. What distinguishes an Auschwitz, a Holocaust survivor parent, as opposed to an ordinary parent?
Indeed.
Well, my first comment on that is, well, it's very difficult for me to be able to make a comparison. I've got nothing to make a true comparison with. But that said,
I should say, because your father being a survivor as well.
Well, my father hadn't experienced the horrors of Auschwitz or the concentration camps, no. But he was a Kindertransport child, and he suffered in a particular way, like the other Kindertransport children, that they were sent away at a very young age and never saw their parents again. Yeah. So they were both survivors in the true sense. But what I would say, looking back at my childhood, and even today, that my Holocaust survivor parent was very focused. She was she made sure that the family, her children, got the best life chances and experiences. She made sure that we got the best education that was available and possible for us. And she instilled values in us, such as never, ever wasting resources. And by that, I mean food and even money. Never, ever waste those valuable resources, because you never know when you're going to need them or when they're going to be taken away. Mm. She's also, as I'm sure you've seen this evening, and as it's been illustrated by your conversation, that she's a firm believer in herself. She has a strong character, and she doesn't suffer fools gladly. And she will never, ever be told what to do. She's no pushover.
She's not arguing.
I think her strength, she's spoken about it, but I also think that strength of character is exemplified by her determination to educate herself when she arrived here. She educated herself. She became a radiographer in a foreign language and passed with flying colours by all accounts, and continued to learn alongside both Peter and David. And I think that's very admirable as well.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit, we really haven't got very long now, but tell us from your, Moira, from your perspective, as not even the daughter-in-law, why you feel it's so important. You do, you two, I should say, do a lot of work going to schools and telling Kitty's story. Why?
Because it's very important to Kitty. And if it's important to Kitty, I guess she's transferred some of that to us. We understand that it's important. And I think it's a story that needs to be told. And clearly we can't tell Kitty's testimony. It's her testimony, but we can help her testimony be heard in the future. And I think that's a really important thing for us to do. And we really believe that, and we feel it so intensely that we made sure when our youngest son, we have 4 sons, when our youngest son was old enough to be taken to Auschwitz, we took all of the boys with Kitty, and we visited her hometown, and we visited Auschwitz, and we visited the Canada section. We wanted very, very much for the boys to be able to say, my grandmother told me. We won't foist it upon them. It's up to them whether they want to continue telling the story, but they can now tell it not firsthand, but as they can share Kitty's testimony, and we've extended that into the future because they've been with her, and she took the time to spend there with us and to share her story with them.
Well, or even looking at that lovely picture of you all extending the story down the staircase, the second and the third generation. Where is that picture?
That's in St Albans Museum. They have a wall on the staircase where they have photographs of famous people in the community, and Kitty's photograph is there. And there's a little explanation about who she is and what she is. So all the boys were obviously very keen to come and visit and see her there.
Let's just close. We're just coming back to Kitty in a couple of minutes that we've got left. Kitty, I want to ask you, if it's not too personal, about looking back at everything, the meaning of it all for you and your legacy. First of all, with everything you've been through and everything you've done since the war, going around and being so forceful an educator and storyteller, what satisfaction do you have? Do you remain frustrated? Do you look back and think, actually, I've done a good job? What sticks out in your mind as being a success?
Well, I wanted to go on until I drop, put it that way. And I realized that my experiences in some ways were different to a lot of other people, being such a long time. And I realized my family needs to know exactly what had happened, because, that's part of being a family. You have to know your roots, haven't you? And that's one way to help them to understand their roots and understand what they are and how they come to be what they are, in fact. Yeah. Well, I don't know.
And there's one, just thinking of what, people carry on your story, there's one artifact, if I can call it that in particular, which is rather extraordinary, which I don't know if you have it there, is your prisoner number. My mother's
my number, yeah.
Number. It's I warn the viewers, it's quite full on, this. That is her mother's skin.
Can I say?
Put it a bit closer to the camera.
It's come up. It's come up on the screen now.
But you've got the real thing there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the sequential numbers 39933 and 34. Yeah. Why did you want to preserve those?
Well, there were definite reasons. I was working in hospitals, wasn't I? And my number was so visible, and I wasn't going to cover it up. And then people would stare at it and look at it. They had no idea what it was. Some people wanted to know, is it my boyfriend's telephone number? And that actually got at me, And I thought, it's got to go. I know it's got to go. And what's more, it's got to go, but it's got to be preserved. And I'm glad I've done this, because a lot of survivors have died with their numbers, and it's gone. But this is going to stay, and it can go into a museum. And so I was actually pleased that I did have the two numbers removed, although at first I was distraught having that removed. But I did realize that really, as far as the future is concerned, I should preserve it. And that's what I've tried to do. That's where it is.
Oh, I don't think you get many more extraordinary objects or artifacts than that. But I guess, yeah.
There might be some people that have it. I don't know. Mine doesn't look very good anymore. It shrunk because it's been sort of in the pickle rather a long time. Because my mother's was removed after she died. But yes, mine was removed before that, and it kind of shrunk a bit. So it's not as good as my mother's, actually. Okay.
Well, you talk about it being in a museum. We're a museum.
I know. I know. It's been there once before. Let me tell you. Yes, I have handed it over. Yes. But Stephen thought it was a bizarre object to show.
Well, it is. I think.
And I said, "Well, I'll have it back for now. Thank you."
Well, I think I think it's a pretty gruesome thing, and I think we have to.
That's what he thought. Yeah.
But I think there's a place. There's a place for it. I mean, I just want to finish with what you think. You've explained very clearly why you told your story. Primarily for your family can continue. They know that you took them to these places. They've been there, and they can tell the story in their own way. Get that. You've worked incredibly closely with Stephen, with his mother Marina, with James, his brother, our founders. You were one of the founding forces of the Holocaust Education Trust. You worked with Greville Janner. You're a founding trustee. Both sets of people, admire you tremendously. How do you just close by telling us what do you want us to do in terms of
carry on my work? Thank you. Please carry on the good work. What you're doing is fantastic, and so carry on the good work. Yeah.
Well, we will certainly do our best.
And I want my children to carry on. I want Peter to carry on if he can. Yeah, he can take over my testimony very easily now. So that's the legacy, I hope.
Well, we will certainly do that. Some lovely pictures here of you up at Laxton at Marina Smith's green.
Really?
I think I don't know whose grandchildren is in the picture there. I think probably.
I don't know.
It might be Ariel. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Yeah, no.
And that's Peter, isn't it, on the left?
It is.
Still not massively hirsute, but what there is darker.
I don't.
Indeed.
I don't know this picture. Yeah.
I think that's for one of Marina's many parties. You're part of the family, as far as
we call ourselves. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful story.
Family. Yeah.
Lovely, really lovely. Well, look, I think we better wrap it up because we've gone longer than our allocated time. But it's an amazing story. I know we haven't told it all probably tonight, but I hope that people have understood what it was. The Queen. I know there was a degree of luck, but you made your own luck in many instances, and your example of fortitude and bravery and resourcefulness is exemplary, and we will certainly be telling that story for as long as we're allowed to. With or without. Kitty, thank you. Peter and Moira, thank you for joining us. Really appreciated your time. Wonderful. And we will stay in touch.
Thank you very much.
For everyone for watching, I'm sorry it's overrun. I hope it's been worthwhile from your perspective. That wraps up this series. All I wanted to say, apart from thank you for watching, is that to get the proper story and not the kind of dribs and drabs of it, as we've kind of been through tonight, I would read, if I were you, Kitty's most recent book, Return to Auschwitz. It is all laid out very fulsomely and very, very well described, as you might imagine, having heard Kitty tonight. If you've watched this show, then there's some details on the screen of getting it at a special offer price of a £5, which seems like a pretty good deal to me. Just follow the instructions on the screen. Again, to everybody, Kitty, Peter and Moira, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Everybody out there, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
See you again in April.
Thank you.